assuming no knowledge of the audience and of myself, maybe we can begin with a bit about intellectual property and patents, kind of why they exist and how they function in any kind of space. Then we can get on to the psychedelic space.
Sure. So patents are one type of intellectual property as a category, which broadly covers just sort of the fruits of creative kind of intellectual enterprise. So includes things like copyrights, people's written or artistic works, like trademarks, which are brands to protect businesses or products of businesses. Trade secrets are generally considered within intellectual property. And then patents, of course, which cover typically inventions is what people see them as, like useful inventions, but there are also other categories of patents. So there's design patents, which are somewhat similar to a trademark, that are more to the aesthetic appearance of something. And then also plant patents, which cover a just specific genetic plant and its clones. But usually when we talk about patents in this space, with one exception, there was an ayahuasca patent that was, I think, from the 1980s. That's a plant patent, but mostly, at least today, the patents that are, considered controversial in the psychedelic space, we're talking about utility patents. So those are, new and useful inventions. And the point of them is to encourage the innovation that is ultimately protected. So it's considered to be a bargain between the patent applicant and the government, or I guess the people who give the government the right to grant the patent. So it's an exchange where the patent owner basically discloses what the invention is to the public. So puts that into the greater pool of public knowledge. And in exchange for that, gets a temporary monopoly on the use of what that invention is. So that both is supposed to at least incentivize that disclosure, but also incentivize the activity that leads to that disclosure. So, you can imagine there are, for instance, like pharmaceuticals is probably the best example, because that's something where people really argue it wouldn't take place if it wasn't for the benefit of a patent. So, you can think of like the sort of design space or invention space of all these compounds. Like none of these would ever get to market unless somebody could get a way of protecting their investment in taking one of those molecules and putting the research into showing that it's safe and showing that it's effective for some particular indication, and then ultimately paying for all that clinical research and paying for the FDA approval, having some time to recoup all that investment. So that the patent sort of is a mechanism to allow that exchange to take place, to ensure that those types of inventions will happen. And of course, there's a lot of areas, I think, where it's arguable if that's necessarily true, and there's also other ways where somebody can get that investment back. So MAPS, for instance, uses data exclusivity, or will, if it gets FDA approval, which is a way for it to get some sort of exclusivity over the sale of something. So there are alternatives, and it's an open question specifically for certain inventions, but that's at least from a general overview, that's kind of like what the bargain is considered to be from a sort of high level.
Right. And so we're talking very explicitly here about a kind of free market context where we're looking to incentivize people to produce something, and they're only going to do that if they're going to profit, right? But then in the psychedelic space, there are other models as well. And I think a lot of people, when they first hear of think of psychedelics being widely available, perhaps for some people, the pharmaceutical model will come to mind, and they'll think, well, this needs to go through the same kind of approval process. It needs to be, the chemical, say like psilocybin, needs to be manufactured into a pill that can be administered by doctors. For other people in the space, they'll, maybe decriminalization, where they just say, well, we don't need that. These are naturally occurring substances, right? So why would we need to have issues around barring access? And so all of this we're in the middle of a debate around the ethics of this, right? Which seems to me about not only the issues of, well, who should profit out of something that's naturally given and a kind of ancient tradition, but also, I guess, the idea of prioritizing profit over access. Is that a major aspect of the kind of debate around this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that really is all those things that you summarize are sort of the key points in this debate. So certainly one of them, that medicalization perhaps is not the best route, and perhaps that's not the route we should be sort of prioritizing. And then one, of course, that these compounds aren't in that sort of imaginary design space where somebody has to be incentivized to get them out of there and put them through this long clinical trial process, because they're already known to us, and they're not just known to us, but they've come to us through this lineage that includes indigenous groups, and includes for some compounds a long history of practice of people who certainly aren't benefiting by the granting of a monopoly over the use of something. And then, yes, I mean, those things tied together too with the questions over access. So if a company gets a monopoly over the use of a particular compound, like what does that mean for people being able to get access to it? Like, is it only going to be sold at a particular higher prices, or through clinics where the thing that people are now doing may be sort of barred from them through this sort of government grant of a temporary monopoly. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a space where it's important to compare the medicalization route with these other alternatives, legalization and decriminalization, and that's something certainly that doesn't really stand as a analogy in the general pharmaceutical space. So it is certainly something that makes the psychedelic space quite different.